Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. This is a bit of a milestone for me. I've been reviewing for Higher Hertz for a couple of years now, and all along I've been wanting to be able to do a review of Falcon. Falcon doesn't have a public demo, and it's probably been the single synth out there that has interested me more than anything else, but I've not been able to get near it. So thanks very much to Higher Hertz, and particularly to UVI, for ponying up a time-limited license, which allows me to really get in and do it. The way that it was done was very nice, in that it's fully functional so that I can really dig in. Also, another really good thing that we've got to consider here is that I know how complex Falcon is, and I'm able to come up with a review that I think presents it in introductory fashion really very quickly. Only took me a couple of days to get to that point. I've deepened it with a few other things, but it's enough to be able to say, yeah, I can do that. And that's testament to the quality of the workflow of the design of the tool. And at no point did I feel like I needed to throw it out the back door, as you might remember happened with another similar competitor. Alrighty, so the question is, what is Falcon? Falcon is a couple of things. It's an uber synth, so it's a massively powerful synthesizer or synthesis system. In reality, it's actually the infrastructure for a soundware platform. Essentially, think Contact. It is a direct competitor with Contact and Halion in particular, in that it is a platform on which soundware can be developed, and is. There's a lot of, download this instrument, that instrument, this types of things, sample sets and all that sort of thing built around the UVI engine. You may or may not be aware that it's based on Falcon. You may or may not be aware that it's actually running inside a UVI shell. You can download a shell which is free. I think it's called Workstation, but it doesn't do a lot, just like Contact doesn't do a lot until you put a library into it. Falcon is immensely powerful. I'm looking at it here far more as an actual synthesizer. So I'm not looking at presets, I'm not looking at its mixing platforms or any of that sort of stuff. We're looking at the ability for Falcon to be the one synthesizer in your environment. So it's a DIY synthesizer that's modular in a certain sort of a way, but not with the plugs and cables on the front end. They just exist virtually in the background, and it is immensely powerful. But it's also relatively easy to get started with. Relative being, to some extent, where you're at in your understanding. So let's step aside for a moment. I have actually made two pieces with Falcon whilst I've had it already, and my intent at the moment is actually, with the time given, to make a whole record using nothing but Falcon for the sounds. Just so that you can see, the first piece we're playing is actually a mix down, but the mix looks very similar to this in that there is a Hornet analog stage and the G-Sonic tape unit. Normally I would, and possibly when I get to the end, would have an analog stage on each instrument, but I wanted to keep the sound relatively pure, but at the same time represent a real mix, and my standard mastering kind of stuff. In theory, all of this stuff could be done inside Falcon, so I could feed it a MIDI file or feed it the MIDI, especially if I was using something like Reaper, which allows multi-timbral instruments, but Reason does not, and I am staying where I'm comfortable. Otherwise, it's not entirely a honest personal review. So we've got a full working mix and, of course, reverb, which is Hertz multiplier. Freebie. So the first thing we'll take a dip into, just as representative of sounds that I've made to work in the piece. So big, sweepy, evolving, paddy kind of thing. This actually started in Reason using a Reason synth, and I said, okay, what can I do? I couldn't duplicate that sound because there are certain things about Parsec that just don't necessarily have direct relationships, but I got something that works just fine. We add this pulsed sound, electric piano. Again, remember, all of these sounds are actually created in the mix using pure synthesis. There are no samples, there are no presets in here at all. A B3 organ. Again, just using Falcon modules, no presets, no anything. B3's moved up, and now we've got a sort of D50 style attacky pad. Sounds working around each other. And there is a sound effect in the background there as well. So that's what Falcon really is. That's what it's designed to do for someone like me. It's designed to be the one synth to rule them all. And that's the way that I'm going to be looking at it here. So we're not really going to spend much time at all talking about presets and sound banks and this, that, and the other. They exist. They're there. By all means, go have a look at them. We will switch now to live mix, which we will dig into later as we walk through features. In terms of a quick overview, Falcon is physically rather large. You've got 3 panels, one which makes not a lot of sense in my situation here, but in a multi-timbral situation where you're using one instrument with lots of patches, then you line up all of your patches here. It is entirely possible to take patches from sandbanks like this one here and pile them up. So you can have several of them all running at once, layering. Not a thing I do an awful lot because I tend to build that into my patches, but there's nothing wrong with your saying, oh, I like that patch and I like that patch, I'm going to layer them together. And you can run them together, or if you are in a DAW which will handle a multi-timbral synth, then you can have the 2 of them in the one box, or you can have all 16 instruments in the one box receiving, in which case you see all your programs here, so each of the instruments in your little orchestra, and then you would be mixing them here. And you've got a reasonably well-functioning DAW style mixer, the ability to put in inserts and sends and all that kind of stuff. I did not dig into this because it should be relatively self-evident and should work. There's nothing to me that suggests that it wouldn't. Performances and stuff. There's also the ability, and presets, I didn't make them, can have a sort of a splash screen faceplate, similar to Combinator in Reason. And that seems relatively elegant, and there is the ability to do a lot of scripting, which I am not going to discuss at all because it's scripting. Ooh. That's basically what the instrument does. I'm going to keep these panels off because we're not playing with presets and we don't need to see this. I did need to come to terms with understanding how to do some certain things without seeing the side panels, but for the moment we're going to turn them off because it simplifies for everyone. Alrighty, so who are UVI? Now, I've looked at UVI before with their dual delay X, and I'll be really honest and say you watch that review, you'll see that I'm not exactly whelmed. I didn't make a lot of sense of it. It was clearly high quality with a lot of interesting features, but I found it very transparent. I hope for character. So on its own, it didn't make a lot of sense to me, but inside Falcon, it makes a lot more sense. So there are a few of their effects that are pulled out. If you see an effect here and you go, ooh, that would be, ooh, then go have a look at them. But I will recommend downloading and trying them because, at least based on this one instance, which is hardly scientific, that dual delay X makes much more sense inside this device than it does as a standalone. It is $349. That's US dollars, so it's not cheap, but it's also not stupid expensive. We will look at that relationship to the market in a little while. UVI, as I said, they're possibly more well known than you realize. You may, if you've got soundware banks that aren't running in Contact, then they may well be running in a UVI backend. So they have this very powerful infrastructure for things. Took a while for them to put Falcon out as a front end for their back end, but I was bowled over when I first saw it. I was like, oh my, because I've always had this desire to have one computer, quite a few screens, and one powerful synthesizer, not 47 plugins all cluttering up the world, but essentially one. This is why I like Reason so much, because while there are lots of instruments, it is at heart one device. And their instruments are made, like Europa is made such that it's possible to change a lot of flavors within the one box. So I'm only working with one thing. I'm only learning one thing. I'm not having to learn how does this dev think. I'm not having to learn how does that dev think and what weird odd nonsense things have been made in this instrument. That's why I don't have fleets of things, because they just create clutter and make me less efficient. When I'm making a piece and I want to make a sound, what you just heard and what you're going to hear, they're all sounds made in the mix. I'm sort of going, okay, what does the piece want next? I need to create this kind of sound. I want to be able to do it and get it right. And so something like Falcon, that you can move from one thing to another or add a little bit of that, is tremendous. So it's not like having a Jupiter 8 where it's going to sound like a Jupiter 8 and sound like a Jupiter 8 and sound like a Jupiter 8. I can say, okay, look, I think I want a Jupiter 80 kind of feel on the thing, and partway through I can go, now look, I want an element that's quite DX7, and I want an element that's a bit PPG. If I've got a Jupiter 8 clone, done. Yeah, I can get into running different instruments and layers and stuff, but then I'm working with 3 different devices at once, each of them pulling in a different direction. Whereas here, I can work with one instrument, one style, and have all those elements that I want. That's really important for a functional kind of a studio life, as far as I'm concerned. Some people like the mess of all these things pulling in different directions. I don't. I'm interested in the music, not the technology. So the question is, does this become efficient, effective technology? In terms of price, yes, this is $349. So as I say, not exactly a cheap instrument where a lot of them are around the 150 or 200 if they're serious. This is pushing into another realm. But let's be fair and compare it to some similar-ish things out there in the real world, because practical's part of it. If I were to be saying, okay, I'm seriously thinking of buying this, then I'm going to be like, well, what are the competitors? What are the other options that would deliver a similar enough result? So Falcon at $349. Phase Plant is at $199. Now, Phase Plant is a bit of a able to do everything kind of an instrument. It's surprisingly capable, and in many ways I like it. I've been very positive in review of that, and also have used it a time or two. It's appeared in bits and pieces on a few albums, and I made a whole album when I first got it out of nothing but Phase Plant. But it has some limits, and I find it a little clunky at times. If it was my only instrument, if I didn't have Reason, yeah, I would think that Phase Plant was wonderful. And it's entirely possible that I would say, okay, that's the one I would go with, because price alone is significantly more attractive. But understand that it does have its limits, and its pricing reflects that. The next one, price-wise, and price seems to be always going up and down, but it seems to be more going down these days. It seems to be trending down, is Contact, NI's Contact. There is an increasing amount of negativity about Contact's inability to bring itself forward it does feel rather stuck in the past. I reviewed it and in certain ways liked it. I think it sounds good. But the problem is it's a dinosaur. And in terms of if you just want lots of soundware, to be able to download lots and lots of guitar this and piano that and what have you, then Contact is a very attractive platform. But bear in mind, I'm looking at this from the point of view of a real synthesist who's looking to get and access the power of the instrument myself, not what somebody else did. I don't care what somebody else did. That's their problem, not mine. My problem is what I'm going to be able to do. And Contact is unpleasant to use. While there are definite similarities to this workflow, at $299 against $349, to me it would be a no-brainer Falcon every day. Then we've got Hallion, Steinberg's Bête Noire. Hallion, I was completely torn in review. Nightmare to use. Now, to be fair, there is now a version 7 which I have not looked at, and it does handle some of the issues that I had at the time, but 523 is a notable difference between 349 and especially 199 or 299 from the others. But I wiped Contact off straight away because I find it so unusable, it's so unfriendly. But Hallion was vastly unfriendly as well. But if you put the time in and just worked with its beastliness from where it was, and maybe it has become more friendly with version 7, they seem to indicate maybe it has, it sounds fabulous. Comparing Hallion to Falcon, I have not A-B'd them because I can't be bothered downloading and installing all these heavyweight things just for a couple of seconds of they're both good, but I remember being super impressed with Hallion. So if anything, possibly Hallion has the best sound quality of the whole lot. But is anybody who's listening to music going to know or care? I think not. So Hallion is wonderful, but you have got to be dedicated to it, not only financially, but in terms of its usability. Falcon is far easier to use. So in terms of which would I be choosing, of those, it would be Falcon. Phase Plant, I just feel like you hit a wall. But that's not to say you can't do an awful lot with it, but it's less capable, it's just less elegant overall. But it is built to be more of a price point, whereas Falcon is designed to be a bigger, scarier thing. Hallion is big and scary, but that's its problem. It ends up being too scary. That said, there are some things that I have not been able to find Falcon to be able to directly, easily do. Like if you watched the Hallion review, you saw I was very pleased at being able to draw waveforms for their wavetable-y thing, whereas Falcon's wavetable, while they say you can import things, including wave files, I throw a wave file at it and it spat it straight back out of me. I didn't go any further in investigating it, but its wavetable seemed to be missing one of its fundamental features. Would that be enough to kill it? Probably not, given time and some RTFMing, which I absolutely did not do with Falcon at all. Then I would work out how to do it, but I sure would not be buying Serum to be able to do it. And then, of course, we've got to look at the final contender, the dark horse, and the one that I have been in for a very long time, before Falcon even existed, and that is Reason. Reason is now at $499, but to be fair, you're getting a full DAW. You are also getting pre-built instruments, so Europa, Thor, even Subtractor on its own is an incredibly powerful instrument. There's grain, and the whole modular system, which is honestly a lot easier to start with on the uptake than Falcon. Doesn't have some of the deeper scripting and things like that, and you can't go make soundware, but it has a very elegant system in its refills that you can make as well. So the big thing is, as far as I'm concerned, we can cross off most of the others. Other than for possible sound quality with Hallion, we can cross off all the others and simply say, okay, Falcon to Reason. If we were only looking for a synth because we have a DAW of choice that we're not going to move out of, then Falcon. If we're talking sound quality, because I have with others, then much as it might pain me to say, in certain ways Falcon is better than Reason. It is a warmer sound, but it is nice and detailed, but it's warmer, it's different. Reason has a very specific sort of a sound. While I'm not a fan of people talking about Reason sound, there is a kind of a sound in it. Exactly what it is and where it comes from, I'm not sure, but it's a lot brighter. So much brighter, which can be easily taken as thin, but given time, you work with it. I committed myself to working with that sound a few decades ago, and I have no problems with it. I can get whatever I want out of it. The new record, which I mentioned in the last review, I wanted a warmer, dottier, spottier sound, and that's what comes across wherever I play it. But it is more expensive. It's getting expensive now if you're only looking at the synth, but its usability is another level of elegance and easy to get into compared even to Falcon. So that's looking at it in the market. I'll run through my good and bad, then we'll start to dig into the bird itself. So, what is good? It sounds very good. Within moments, just of flipping through presets, which I've deliberately not wasted anyone's time with here, there's lots of videos of presets, I'm thinking, wow, this is kind of like having a hardware workstation. So a Triton or a Montage or a whatever we are thinking of, physical keyboard thing that we might go out and gig with when we're backing band for Garth Brooks. It sounds and feels like that in many ways. That's a good thing. It is powerful. It is very powerful. It's really as powerful in broad terms as you are able to harness it. So initially, you're going to miss a lot of what it's capable of, as I believe I've most likely missed so much of what could be done because I just didn't see or stop to think, I could do that. That's time. I get that within reason because I've been here so long. It's 15 years or something like that I've been in this one environment, so I know it super well. There are very few things that you can't ask me and have me duplicate something that's going to work really quickly. So its power is tremendous, and as I've said several times, it is incredibly elegant. Reason and Falcon, well, Reason is more elegant because it's visually easier to understand what's going on, but different people are going to have a different approach. Falcon is a little bit more techie, it's a little bit more nerdy, but it's elegant in its own way. Once you understand how it works, and provided you have the mindset to be able to see things in your head, to see the infrastructure, to see the architecture in your head, and if you can't do that, you're not really suited to being a sound designer, I'm sorry to say. Guitarists see something in their head or their bodies when they play. I don't. But I do see the architecture inside a synthesis patch. If you can do that, it's elegant. And once you start to get your head around it, it is fast. I found Hallion really slow. I find Phaseplant a bit slow. Obviously would get faster as time goes by with it, but I was up to speed with this really fast. The first piece was written in, let's say, 2 days total. The second piece, apart from the fact that the initial chord run was already written, as I said, I'd started as a reason thing, so it was sitting around, and then I thought, oh, let's have a go with the next track. It's like, oh, that's there. How am I going to be able to compare with the Parsec sound within Falcon? That was done within a few hours. Okay, it's a relatively simple piece, but that's the speed I want to work at, and Falcon will be as fast as you are capable of learning. And as I said before, I didn't RTFM. I did not read the manual. I did have to look because I did have a difficulty at the beginning, which we'll discuss in a moment. But overall, very powerful, very good sounding, incredibly capable instrument if you're going to put the time and energy into being the sound designer. So yes, big thumbs up from me on that. Bads. Okay, there may be a few of these, but there are, because I like it so much, and they are quibbles. Getting something like this, I would, especially seeing it feels like a hardware workstation in terms of sound, I was a little surprised and perhaps a little disappointed that there wasn't a sort of a general MIDI style, just across the board, meat and potatoes sound bank. Purity, if you will. That feels like an odd omission for such a thing, seeing a lot of people will buy this thinking, oh, well, that's just what they're going to use. And it is really useful to have that meat and potatoes sort of sound bank. So when you open this up, you're not going to have a nice acoustic grand piano, an electric guitar, and a basic set of strings. And there are a lot of patches, and they are generally all very, very good. And if you are looking for alternates to those kinds of sounds, you will definitely find them. But in terms of those sounds, those formula cliche sounds that will get you through any gig, there didn't seem to be a bank. Maybe with the $100 voucher that I would get through purchasing, maybe there's a bank like that, but I don't recall that being there. And it just seems like a decision, but it seems like an odd decision where you invest this kind of money. Like as if I go out and I buy a Triton, Korg, Montage or whatever, a Yamaha something or other motif, I would expect that I would have those meat and potato sounds that I would probably never put in my mixes, but will be useful for client work. It is a little hard to start with, especially if you are not an experienced synthesist. Is this the first synth that you should get? It's not the first thing I would say you should start on, but if you start here, then really RTFM and understand how it works and watch videos to understand how it works. We'll cover a little bit of it here, but that's not my job to be doing that at the moment. I was stalled for a bit, and I was starting to think, is this going to be like Hallion, that I'm just going to hate using it, no matter how much I think it's cool? But no, I suddenly made sense of it. It uses this layer system of key maps and what have you, which I never liked, even back in the late 80s, early 90s with samplers. Akai were all into key maps. Emu didn't have anything like that at all. Yes, there was the ability to map things to parts of the keyboard, but you didn't have to lay down key maps so that you can lay down a layer and then lay down another layer and then lay down a preset and then lay down a program. Just like, who comes up with this stuff? But that's become a paradigm that goes across the soundware industry, and maybe there is some good reason behind it. I don't like it. But I struggled with that once I settled with the, oh, that's what you got to do. That's how it works. Then, yep, it works. And as I said, I was able to get up to speed and be working fast quite quickly, despite the fact that I've got to make a move that I don't see that I should have to make. But this is how it works. There is no cross-modulation. I had the same complaint with Hallion. So for such a powerful instrument, you can't take a signal from one place and use it somewhere else. You can in Reason. Not so much in the cross-modulation, but it can be done if you really want to do it. You can take the audio from any instrument and convert it to CV, or possibly even run it into an audio input and then use that to manglify other things. But for such an elegant system, such an advanced system, I would prefer that there be some kind of cross-modulation, that I can take audio signals or similar from somewhere and apply them somewhere else. There is ability, I believe, for sidechaining and what have you, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about cross-modulation. So like if I could say, I've got this patch or this part of the patch, and it's got this cool sample, and I want to use that as an FM source for the string so that it now sounds like a collection of ducks. That's a thing that I would want to do, which I do. And it's not there. Now, it wasn't there in Hallion, but I believe that version 7 has done it, so hopefully that will kick Falcon between the wings and make them go, this is a weakness. Because that's a thing. You don't always want to do it, but when you do want to do it and you can't do it, you're like, all this infrastructure, all this ability to move things around, and you can't do that. The mass wheel parameter did annoy me. I would rather have a checkbox for this. So if you hover over a control and then you move your mouse wheel, the parameter moves. Now I can appreciate that that is a good feature, but not when you find yourself moving parameters without realizing it. So I would prefer, because it happened to me several times, that there perhaps just be somewhere in the settings that says, turn that helpful feature off because it's really annoying. Smallish thing, you just learn over time to, I guess, be less wheelie, but there are times where you just wheel things, and so maybe default to having it on, and then give an option to say kill it completely, or a key command, press an unusual key, 479 and the tilde button, and then use the wheel. That way I'm not going to make errors and have things move without my wanting to. It also does not respond to Control Z. That I do find annoying because everything in Reason can respond to Control Z, and many VST respond to Control Z. If I want to undo something, I have to go here. That's just clunky. And there is an oddity of automation in Reason. If I want to automate something from my door, then I have to assign it to, now there's nothing wrong with this is inevitable and necessary, one of the 128 available VST slots for host automation. You can see I've applied one to host 1, which is the volume of this thing, but if I wanted to, then I could assign it to 2. It comes up and we can see it in Reason, but as soon as we go to do anything, it flings itself to 0. Rather than keeping the current state. Normally with a VST, or especially within Reason, if I click on the filter and say, give me an automation lane, it'll create its current state as being my set point. And that's how it should be. It shouldn't go, yeah, who cares what you're doing, we're going to default it to 0, because not only does my sound now disappear, but what if I hadn't actually deliberately remembered exactly the setting for that filter or that parameter? I don't know whether it's a Reason-specific thing, but if it is, let's deal with that. For the kind of money you invest in this, they're the little quibbles that will see somebody bitch online or walk away. Overall, though, for what it is a very, very impressive piece of kit. Now, speaking of, I'm going to work us through another piece. This one was the first thing done with Falcon. So we can close up that. We're now working with real music. We're going to work through the instrument and how it works from the point of view of a piece. And I'll pop this at the end so that you can hear the whole thing. Again, in terms of the mix, we have got Falcon devices handling as much as is practical and possible without getting weird or doing things that I would never do in a mix. Where I might commonly have a horn and analog stage on every instrument, I've just put one at the beginning of the master, which is not normal for me. I'd have them there. The analog tape machine, because that's normal. The glue compression here. Again, this could all be done within Falcon if you're able to feed it one MIDI stream, but Reason doesn't handle multi-timbral instruments. Good, bad, indifferent, don't care. We've got lots of instances running and no effort with the CPU at all. Our master, and then of course using multiplier as our reverb unit for a real Benedict style reverb. So let's look at the device a little bit more. So we open it up and we may well have these windows open. I'm going to close them because, as I say, I find them clutter. Now, I can't add an oscillator because it's hidden down here. You've got to start by adding a map. If you don't have a key group, you are nowhere. Nothing happens without a key group. That's the thing that had me stalled for some time. You can create and save your own key group things. See the user template thing? I did not do it, but I'm going to assume it works because everything in here seems to work really well. You can create a synth template or a sample template. They're both exactly the same. One just has a synth oscillator, the other has a sample oscillator, but the sample template does use the more advanced envelope. So we'll go with one of those. Woohoo! I've now got a key group. If I wanted 2 layers within this one key group, then I have to simply create a second one, and then I would use this to drag it so that I could click from one to another. It's possible to click from one to another using this tree on the side, but believe me, sudden personal death would probably be preferable to this. So I found a kind of a hack. It's a little weird that you can't move layers or key groups, but I don't know why. But maybe I'm missing it. Again, no RTFM, just working out what happens. So we now have a workable instrument. I'm going to close that down because it's wasting my space. I can literally drag and drop a sample in here. I don't have to tie it to the database of the instrument or any of that kind of BS that really does me in with so many other things. I could just drag and drop a sample here and presto, it'll work. If I want to change, then this is nice. It took me a couple of goes to realize I can just right click on this and then I can swap to something else. If I've got a sample loaded and I go to the Occam granular, the sample will still be here. And it'll carry over any relevant settings which are comparable, or at least it seemed to. That's good. So you've got granular, a few different versions of granular. This allows you multiple playheads. It is not the most advanced granular that I have used by a reasonable shot. I think the granular in Hallion was probably better. But to say that it's problematic, I think would be heavy-handed, especially seeing I'm not big on granular. I use it from time to time, but grain within reason is a single playhead. If you want multiple playheads, then launch multiples. This gives you multiple playheads, but it's just not the most advanced or elegant system. Over time, maybe that'll improve. Occam Scrub seems to be to allow you to move around. A lot of these are instances of really just slight variations on the same thing. If I were to have a criticism of that, it would be, don't give me as many modules. Give me one module with the ability to do all these things. That way I don't need to keep changing around. And if I'm partway through and I go, yeah, I want to do that thing, then I can just work with the thing. But they're trying to keep these little panels here as small as possible. I understand it, but that would just be my thought. There is the ability to do the slicey-wicey thing. Didn't try it, assume it works, and sample stretching and what have you. I didn't spend a lot of time in those, but I did use the granular and multi-granular and possibly the scrub, but not in any useful way. And then we've got synth engines. So there's a simple analog. It is a single oscillator, which we can choose basic forms. Then I looked at it and I was like, how do I change the tuning? I can't change the tuning on this thing. This is where it gets a little obtuse in that you would have to do it here, but then this is that whole key group. So if I've got more than one oscillator in here, like let's say I've got two analogs, I can't tune them against each other. But their thinking is, well, you just wouldn't do that, sir. You would do this, which is the analog stack, which is up to 8 oscillators that I can turn on or off, and then I can offset them against each other. Cool. That's the basic form under which it works. You've then got, and you've got to move. You can put your filters within here, but it makes more sense to put them into layers. So we would add, and sometimes it's slow. I don't know whether that's a reason thing. I do have an issue with video card, I think, is prone to being slow and just having some issues. So we can take a filter. There are a lot of filter types in here. Again, some of them feel a little redundant. It's hard to necessarily tell the difference one to another. And res filter, what on earth is that? But remember, I did not RTFM at all. The Salon-Key filter didn't feel at all like an MS-20, and it's probably silly of me to assume, because the MS-20 was a Salon-Key, that this should be the same, but their flagship is this fella. Let's just put these into a more pleasing sort of format and give them something to filter on. They're nice sounding filters. They behave well. These you've got lots and lots of shapes. There are some slight oddities with them, but they all work and they all sound incredibly good. And then the program, if I wanted to add a delay, I would do it at the program level. There's nothing to stop you from doing it at other levels, but you're going to end up with a messy patch, which might be doing things that eat a lot of CPU. Like if you have one delay here, you've only got one lot of CPU hit. But if we put it inside the voice path, then we're going to have a delay per voice, which can be great for certain things. Phase plant allows you to do that. Some of these are a little odd. I mean, it'll go out to 2 seconds, which in theory is great, but yeah. But if you double click, you can get. And let's say I want to modulate this, then this gets a little bit trickier. So we add modulation. We've got to decide where we put it. It makes far more sense to put it in the layer, in which case we go with, let's go with an envelope. We'll have a simple ADSR in this case. And now it gets like, oh, it's appeared down here. But if you want to focus, you can right click, edit modulations, and now it appears here until you click somewhere else. And oddly, I'm not hearing anything. Maybe because I've put this in the wrong spot. So let's put it here. I think this is the user error. Put it here, and this is part of why I don't love these kinds of things. Because they're unnecessarily complex in 99% of the time. Okay, that's user error. Putting it in the wrong spot because I haven't used it for a couple of days. I've forgotten where it's supposed to go. Over time, you would get better at that. There is power in separating key groups and layers and programs, but it just... So now I've got this thing here. I can use my mouse wheel to... And that does sound really good, even in headphones. There's a warmth, a transparency in it, where Reason is prone to being a little brittle and hard. What that is, don't know, really don't care. It's simply the case of it. But I found I needed to brighten the Falcon-based mix more than a Reason-based mix where I'd be looking to warm it up. There's no right or wrong there. You've just got to know what your tools are and what they're doing. But that's basically how a patch works. We'll pull this guy out and go through the piece. Yes. There's a fair amount of reverb in here. Which is obviously very obvious at the moment, but not so much in the mix. See how they seem kind of dry now? But that's just part of mixing. So what we have is obviously a key map. We're always going to have one of those. I've used the drum module designed for creating analog type drums, and I've used one of the script processors, which there are quite a few, to do various things. And this one is like a drum sequencing module. So again, no RTFM. Set it up. Now when I press most keys, I just get the sound. And I've used this like a classic analog synth. It's not meant to sound like a normal drum machine. But on C, it's triggering this pattern. I can close that down. By clicking, I can open up. We've got a little bit of the old compression, which we bypass. So the same compression is being done somewhere else. So that helps tame that. It's quite a nice compressor. Got to get a little bit used to it, but it's quite a nice compressor. Looks good. There are other models for compression, but this one was easier to see and understand. It even gives you one of these totally useless but ever attractive and pro feeling little graphs if you can't sort of manage that. And then the digital EQ, this is nice. Because as we hear, our kick's not very manly without this. So there's a real, what we call Pro Q style EQ. There is a version of this called Shade, which also has a lot of modulation built into it. Looks interesting. If I were actually going to be buying an EQ of this style, I would look at this, the Shade, and again would be looking at Kirchhoff, because I really liked that. Pro Q, yeah, it's good. Just don't dig it. So we've set our points and done all our EQ-y stuff. This was a joy to use. So that's very, very nice. It's a good addition. It's a good thing that's there. There are other EQs, and again, we could just right-click and pull up anything else that we wanted, including things which are like emulations of old amplifiers and what have you. But the digital EQ is the one you want. It does just feel a little like, oh, to launch it, you've got to go to here or choose a preset. I don't want a preset, so I just choose default every time. So there's a little bit of, but you get used to it. Again, it works out being really quite fast. So those can all be closed down. Again, just that little bit of lag. I'm not quite sure what's causing that. And that's our drum sound. Next one, we've got this big sort of FME bass sound, which is actually made from a multi-granular. So of course we had to start with a map. Our amplitude envelope is here. This is that nice MSEGI kind of thing. I think it's got more tricks up its sleeve, but I didn't use it for anything more than this. And we've got 3 voices. If we pull it down to 1, obviously we lose some. What I did find with this was that it was quite latent, so it was slow. So press the key, there was quite a drag. Once it's in the sequencer, obviously it didn't match with the sequence, so this sound played late. But I simply used the reason feature to move this so that the notes trigger early. And it's adequate. Is it perfectly in time? Don't know, don't care. Overall, it helps give the piece part of its groove. It's very much in keeping with how these sorts of things did end up happening in the mid to late 80s as these sorts of technologies were coming around. So really cool oscillator sound. That is from it's an additive sample that I made of, and I've actually used it before in Hi-Hertz reviews. Might have been in the Tal Sampler review of an additive electric guitar. Up here, what have we got? Like this? Oh yeah, there is using the digital filter, which is actually a nice, pure, straight digital filter, and it works really well for sounds like this. While I like all the bright stuff in it, it just was not kind in the mix, wouldn't stay in its place. So digital filter, a diffusion, to help just give it that broader, less dry, immediate feel. So that is a kind of sort of close reverb type situation. And then dual delay. Remember dual delay X that I reviewed and didn't gel with it, but here straight away it became far more lovable. And look, I actually used BPM sync, partly because I was like, this was big on BPM sync, and where is it? It's over here. That's a bit of an oddity, but just like Hallian, you've got to get used to all the little icons floating around places that do things. But once you're used to it, it works fairly well, and this sounds really good. Let's pull the diffusion out. It adds to the sound really, really well. So, great. Bouncy Bass. When's Bouncy Bass in the game? choose this bit. That's just an extra sound that adds grooviness to our piece. This was a bit of a thing I didn't expect to find, but it's possible to use the wavetable oscillator as a phase distortion or CZ style oscillator. Does it sound perfectly CZ? No, but nobody does. But it actually acquits itself really quite nicely. There are various modes of handling the phase thing, but if you use the bend, then it actually becomes a quite workable CZ style oscillator. And that was a pleasant thing to find. So you can choose your bass form. Unlike the others, you can't click on this and have it open. You've got to click up there. Slight inconsistency, boys and girls. And you've got lots and lots of waveforms available. There are single waveforms, including just the basic forms, which have alternates. The pure sine is very clean. This is just not quite so clean. It's a little bit more digitally, which I thought worked very well. And then the more complex kinds of Joy Division t-shirt sort of things. So if you want to get into the wacka wacka or nice early digital morphing soundscapes, it will do it. As I said, it is possible to bring in your own forms. Apparently it'll work with waveforms, but the waveform I gave to it, it didn't like. So I don't know what the rules are there. There's also an FM cobbled onto the side of it, which is kind of cool. So no FM. So as you see, they've got the technology to do the FM thing. And if we wanted to modulate that somehow with an LFO or an envelope or whatever, we would just do the modulation thing. So that's our nice little digital sound that's sitting in the mix. And that had nothing happening other than just the waveform. So everything else we're hearing is just the reverb unit, the Hertz multiplier. Inside the mix, just adds a nice little bit of movement there. This is where we started. Now, I always start with synth brass because to me that tells me what a synth is going to be capable of, and it was very much in case here because in the first Falcon demos, videos and what have you, and I think they're still there, there's a tremendous analog style brass that's just like, and I wanted to see how they did it. I may have found the patch, but I was sure not going to use it because I have to make my own. And that's this sound, which is... So it's made. Of course, we had to work out how to do that. And then that really to get the simple analog style synthesizer sort of thing, Jupiter 80 sort of platform, it was better to go with the analog stack. Otherwise, it just gets too hard. But this is designed to solve that problem. So a pair of oscillators. We'll turn off our extra things so that you can hear what they add. Bright, buzzy oscillators. We bring in this expander, which has a modulator, so it's an envelope. This is when I was still using the ADSR more than the MSEG, but I like the MSEG better. That's not to say this doesn't have cool things about it. It's just I'd rather use one than multiples. Sounds great. Again, didn't RTFM, so really no sense of what all these extra things do. Played around with them, didn't hear any massive difference, but I wasn't necessarily expecting to. So we've got our filtering happening, layers didn't use, and then getting into some of the fancier effects. You can buy Chorus. It's a multi-voice chorus. and it is nice. Might naturally take a little bit of time to work out how to get the sounds that you're looking for, but it is nice. It's very liquid. It's quite transparent. I didn't come up with an easy way to get that obvious foot stomp pedal kind of chorus. This is designed to be as smooth, and you're not realizing it's chorused. It's just big and rich and velvety. And yeah, it's aces for that. There are probably other modules or versions that give the other sorts of things, but I didn't love the analog chorus, but they're probably emulating pieces of gear that I didn't necessarily love either. The Ensemble 505, I had a 505, hissiest bastard I've ever met. Its ensemble was interesting. Whether this is right or wrong, I don't know, but they were kind of interesting. Compression, we did need some control on this. So again, this device, just because it made sense to me, using the analog delay here, because it does actually sound nice. So we're looking to add space here and depth more than a boing, boing, boing kind of a thing. And this did it very nicely. The analog mode is actually nice. It warms and really degrades the signal. I don't know why that's not in dual delay, except if that had been there and you'd got that really kind of nice, it'd been like, ooh. So I think the technology there is just a little odd that they didn't say, hey, let's put that in so it makes more sense on its own. And then, of course, there's digital EQ. As while this sounds great here, it just becomes a nightmare in the mix. Let's pop it back in. So if we pop our EQ in, just stops it from being so tubby because we've got that great big bass underneath. So nice and simple, and you can do simple EQing with this really, really nicely. I did run through with the F2 window EQ in some things, but some other things I didn't. So the only reason I did was because that's how I mix, and having to open one of these programs and then open its EQ to do mixing is to me a little bit of a fail. But if I were in, let's say, Reaper that would allow me to use this as multi-timbral, I would be a little less annoyed by that, but I'd still be having to go into the here and click on the program and then go find its. But you know, you get used to what you get used to. But in terms of an EQ, it is really, really nice. All right, next, that's this sound here. There's a other sound underneath. This is an additive oscillator. Now, compared to the additive synth in Reason, this is a little not the same. But every additive is going to have its point of view on how it does these things. It is good. You've just got to find what it does and what works nicely with it. But it won't do everything. It's not a real additive instrument at all. You've got no actual control directly over the partials. You can't just say, that particular partial there, I want it to be something. There's none of that. But you just control things through knobs and buttons. So if you see it as like, okay, it's an additive which I've got some front panel control, then it becomes nice that you can definitely set up pleasing sounds that are clearly digital. Yes, there's some distortion in that because I wanted it there. Because without anything, it's a little dry, but that's normal. I wanted it to be in keeping with that big analog-y style brass, and therefore if it's a early digital instrument, it's going to be grainy, grimy, and possibly even a little, especially bearing in mind if I'm playing a record, literally vinyl from 1985, there's probably an awful lot of distortion coming off that record now. Not the fault of the gear or the record pressing or anything, it's just time and tide will have made that record noisy and distorty. So loud bits could well be all kinds of crunchy. It took me a while to realise that that was not necessarily the sound of the 70s, but it's the sound of the 70s now, or the 80s or whatever. That's simply the degradation of those records, but it's the sound I fell in love with. So we've got a wave shaper. I won't say I've mastered this at all, but the extra body that it's adding here is good. It's some sort of digital pitch shifter type thing, possibly granular at heart or what have you. I used a quite digital process here because it adds to the digitalness of the sound, so we get this sense of separation between that and the very Jupiter 80 brass. And then this delay, one of many delays that, again, I'm not entirely sure why they're different. There is some sense of explanation, but again, I'd be like, can we have one to rule them all? Let's just take dual delay X, roll in all of these options. In an elegant way, please, not just for like lists and lists of crap. Some of these respond nicely to modulation, some don't. I don't remember with this, but I know that some of the ones where they've got diffusion and stuff, if you change the time, then they stop calculating. And then they wait for you to stop moving before they'll calculate again. So some of them are modulatable, some of them are not, which obviously I don't necessarily love, but overall, really nice sound. Like it a lot. Cool. Oh, pitch modulation. I haven't talked about that on anything, so LFO. We've got a slightly odd shape. But it adds an indefinable vibrance and movement to that sound. Then we've got the FM chunk. Very FM-y kind of sound. It's been an interesting one to mix because it sounds perfect in the studio and then possibly potentially too loud elsewhere. Very unusual occurrence for me to have that happen, but it's an interesting sound. This is using the FM module. It's only a 4-operator FM, but honestly, 4-operator FM lets you do an awful lot. But I am somewhat spoilt with algorithm that I have in Reason, or comes in Reason Plus, depending on which way you go. That's got 9 operators. Not that I use all 9 as a rule. Generally 4 is more than plenty. But you've got then these. This is the bit that I don't love. Some people love it because they go, oh well, you can move from one algorithm to another and suddenly get this randomly new sound. When I'm making music, random is not what I'm looking for. Yes, there can be happy accidents, but you can be scooting through these and going, oh well, that sounds better than that one, but it's like, it's random. But they're fairly standard forms, and the workability of this as an FM device is nice. Again, just hampered by a lack of more expansive system-wide thinking. But it's cool. It works well. I tried this brick wall filter because naturally being FM, it's very, oh, that's unpleasant. So I just tried this. 96 dB slope, that's pretty aggressive. And this has got a soft bypass rather than a bypass. Maybe it creates some kind of latency. I'm not aware of it, but again, there are just some things like that which you'd obviously have to RTFM to understand. So the filter warms it up, and then we've got, let's add our layers of stuff. The compressor, because I just wanted punch. So if you watch the video I did on Molot and its ability to get this kind of punch, this really can give you a nice kind of punch. It's incredibly fast. It's like 0 milliseconds is what they claim. And then you start with picoseconds. I think it is like fractions of milliseconds. So it can be very fast, but adding a little bit more time actually gives it a much nicer compressor feel if you're after real compression shaping rather than just thou shalt not pass. And then it can get this real nice kind of punch. Its default ratio is 4:1. It can be pretty excitable. So it's an interesting compressor with which really can have a lot of character. This overdrive. So yes, we are transitioning from a bassier sound to forward aggressive, and that's possibly part of why it's a little harder in the mix. But great if you're doing EBM. Wonderful. This tone stack, which is apparently all emulating a jazz chorus, which is a combo box, is my understanding. It's guesswork. And then I used the tape echo, which is seems like a somewhat unnecessary, but so it's an emulation of a space echo with all its limits. Seeing you've got dual delay X, which is capable, and the other analog-y style delay, then this is cute. But you don't seem to have any. Oh, you do have control over those. I didn't realize that. I dragged them before and they didn't seem to do anything. Okay, so you do have control over these. Well, that's kind of interesting. So it's amusing. Again, you don't necessarily have control over modulation. Maybe this one will let you fly modulation in and still work. But it sounds good. So no argument. It's just, as I say, there's a little bit of a plethora of redundancy where I would be like, well, okay, if you've gone all in with dual delay X, let's go all in with dual delay X and dump the others. Or rationalize them in a way that just is more elegant. Because if I can work with 1 unit rather than 47, I'm going to want 1 unit. Many other people may be like, but 47 units means you more freedom, man. It's like, yeah, it's a mess. Give me 1 unit, let me master that. But overall, this sound when it comes out, pretty cool. And we're hearing velocity to change the timbre. Then we've got this little arp, which is designed just to move things along. And it's panning, so we can hear that. We can hear pan here. We've assigned an LFO. Not we, I did this. An LFO. This is a sample. So it's plain and simple. It's the basic sample. Dragged and dropped something in, one of my own. Nicely named here so we can see what it was. You can control your loop points and start and stop and all of that. Really simple, but it works. Put it in the state variable filter to try it. So SBF, that's the SEM, the Oberheim SEM model. Sounds nice. Bandpass is very nice, which it should be in a SEM. Sounds good. A couple of options for driving and what have you. Does its job very nicely. It has that nice warm soft feel inside the mix, which is what I wanted. Of course, level set by this guy here. Again, it's very, very fast on the beginning, but then only goes out to 10 seconds, which is a little on the slow side, but ultimately it doesn't seem to be problematic. The arpeggiator, that's what I'm going to show here. Again, like the drum module, it's a pre-built script thing. So you can make your own things that do stuff. I kept this really very simple because I wanted it to be just like a simple arpeggiator on an SH-101 or a Jupiter 8 type situation. Sounds great. Works nicely. And then our friend Dual Delay X. And of course, we're hearing a fair amount of the reverb in there. If I were to turn that off, we've still got a very nice sound. So having a nice sound before we feed it to the mix is obviously a really cool thing. It's that one. And then this, we've got this pluck sound. Where is he? Pluck. It's a little raucous in the mix, because honestly I was piling a lot in. I wanted to try the PM oscillator. It's got its limits. It's obviously coming out of Reason's Object not so long ago, which I did choose not to purchase. Doesn't mean I'll never own it, but I did choose not to purchase it. Naturally, it's got a fair bit more control than this. It's a bigger engine. They're able to dedicate more space to it because it's taking up like a full Serum size synthesizer space in the world, whereas this is taking up just a module size. But in its own way, it's really pretty cool. We can work from a sample. Let's pull this out. They've got their own set of samples that they offer us, or I believe we can drag in our own as well. So you can use a synth, including having that sustain, or just noise. And for basic physical modeling duties, more exciting strings, it does a surprisingly nice job. I just brought a little bit of that in because we've got a sort of a double pluck there. We can run a pair of strings and couple them together and everything, and play with a bit of what it takes to get the kind of sound that you want. I'm not going to get into it because it's not a review of this module, but we get a pretty nice sort of a sound that plays out well. Brings in movement. It does, however, get a little bit more complex, being me, as we go. Nothing there, nothing there. I used the old analog crunch, because physical modeling can sound a little too unreal. So by giving it a little bit of drive, it makes it seem more like it's actually there. Otherwise, it sounds too thin and not there, like it doesn't quite belong in the world. And then the analog tape delay, which, that's where I was using the analog feel for it. Let's go back and solo this. Normally I'm on multiple screens, so it'll be a lot easier. This one you can modulate the delay, so it's got an LFO on that, but I also wanted to be able to control what happened over time. So when we get to the end, we've got the depth of this changing, so it gets more wonky. And as we get right to the end, it becomes really quite wonky, which on its own you don't necessarily hear. You could very much hear it before, but unfortunately, once we got into the full mix, it became too wonky for comfort. But it helps keep that sound interesting and staying in the mix because there's something different about it as it goes. But not the world's most advanced PM module, but nicely enough set up. And obviously it's considered pretty decent because if you buy one of those MPE keyboards, then you're getting Falcon as your sound source. I think Osmo's is Falcon. It's a keyboard with funny looking things, but in terms of a synth, it's Falcon inside it. And there's some nice stuff coming out of that in terms of cello and what have you. So it's PM module. Once you understand it, it is capable of some very nice things. You just got to give it a little bit of time. We've got this string. This is one where I've got two key groups. I've got this and this. So I found a workaround to just drag off the edges where I'm not playing to be able to allow me from within here to switch key groups, because I could not find a way of switching key groups. I'm like, what? They assume that I'm going to have this open on the tree and work my way down and have these open so that I can go, oh, look, I'm after this, or oh, I'm after that, or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, no, just not gonna happen. So odd that you can't actually, without a fudge, seem to work that. Again, there may be something in the RTFM, but these days, as Whitesea from Snake Oil says, modern design should be that we don't need the RTFM at all, or only for really intricate, what's the logic behind this button kind of thing. But most of its functionality should show itself, and mostly it does. So we've got very simple analog on one with a one-pole filter, so that's a very mild filter. And then the other is a wavetable, which if we turn off... Oh, okay, no, it's the other way around. Sorry, I got that backwards. This is the tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. So we're just using the one pole to smooth off the brightness of it. And we're using modulation of pitch here. So we've got a random LFO modulating pitch here. If we turn him off, go back to the other one, see what I mean? You've got to be able to carry in your mind this stuff. I've made a real sort of divide down style string here, which is using this strange crossover filter. We definitely need to RTFM on it, but in this case it's doing a band pass, so I've set my high, I've set my low to give ourselves that sort of thin divide down feel. Add back in the Tinkly Winklies, which has a diffused delay and our digital EQ, and this is on the whole program. So these two key groups, these two layers as such, are being fed into the one program, which is this diffuse delay, which allows it to sit in the background nicely, and ever lovely to use EQ to make it sit the way that it needs to. Did I do any more EQing at that point once we were in the mix? Just a little bit. Similar sort of things, but just to have it sit within the mix. I find it unpleasant to be doing mix decisions here. I mix and do the EQ for the mix at that point. So very pleased with how that came out. Mr. Strings here. So this roll is really just to fill. Does that nicely. And then where would we be if we did not have a flute? So this is pure, good old-fashioned analog synthesis. So a pair of oscillators, which are one's being driven by the other. Yeah, so it's using oscillator sync and a bit of noise. this UVI filter. Didn't understand its logic compared to the others, but whatever, I got where I wanted to go. Bit of the tape delay and the digital EQ. Sounds a bit cack on its own, but it needs to cut this complex mix at this point. That was brought in really just to drive the melody, because the melody was becoming unstrung through the mush of layers that were happening at that point. But that's how you get big. And then the last sound in the whole mix is this texture sound. This is an interesting oscillator. Initially I was thinking it's going to be close to useless, but there's a button that you can press which puts it into the ability to follow key. Otherwise everything seems to play the same notes. So you can put it into, even though it says legato, you can then put it into key follow. Again, didn't RTFM on it, but that seemed to allow me to use it as a normal sample player and having these two samples against each other. Otherwise, it's designed to put in two samples which are strange background noises, and they give you a whole pile of them, and you balance them up, and then the thing goes tinkle, grindy, what have you, in the background. And this is set up so that as different keys are played, obviously we get different variants of what's available within our texture. And that's just by using a chime synthesis sample and another synthesizer sampler, doing some mucking about and getting them to the point where I liked them. The comb filter, which is, well, a comb filter, again, just feels weird. Why is that not just in a one box to handle everything sort of thing? Downsampling. Just, I wanted to hear what it was going to happen, and I was happy to have it sound just a little depressed. And if I recall correctly, this one has presets that it says is going to sound like these pieces of gear. And having just come out of reviewing ADDDA Hornets, it was like, oh, okay, they do that. And seeing there was an emulator here, an EMU emulator, it was like, let's have a look at that and see how it goes. So it's a bit reducer, but I think that it works nicely in the situation. I was happy with what it added. UVI wide just adds body. Exactly how it's doing it, would have to read the manual. Of course, the digital EQ, just pulling forward what I want, the dual delay, and then spark verb. This is a reputation for being a tremendous reverb. And it probably is. It's very smooth. Anyone who knows me knows that I tend to like these sort of really chunky, ragged sounding reverbs, but this works really nicely to help put the smooth around this, to pull it right back into the background, so that when it's playing, you're not even thinking that it's there. Not there, there. It just sits right in the world. So the Spark has helped me to do that. It would have been interesting to have Spark and to be able to put it across the mix, but I think that I probably, and Spark may have the ability to get very ragged, but I prefer the sound that I've got in, must be off the screen, in that really ragged kind of feel. Because it's the Benedict thing. There's no point me testing this for somebody else. They've got to test that for themselves. But I know with Falcon that's very, very hard. But we've got a combination of all these things, and they're coming together and providing a really, really nice sound. And I know that's fairly long, but I thought the best way to cover something that's just too much to cover in any practical way is to show it used practically. And that is, yep, we've got this great big piece of music that is all Falcons and was written really quickly, and Falcon helped me to get there. Yes, I could have done this piece in Reason, Would it sound the same? No, of course not. Would they be comparable? Yes, but there is something about the sound of Falcon that is not the same as Reason. As I say, it's very warm on top. It's very sort of clear and transparent. I don't think it sounds analog per se, but it does a really, really nice, good job of digital analog. Incredibly good. And you can get whatever you want out of it once you know how to drive it. Just that little bit different on how it manages the top end over what Reason does, and also really efficient. While I don't have tons and tons of tracks, they're all doing their job, and we're not taxing the CPU at all. Alrighty, so this is really the end of the program. My final words are what I just said. It's an incredibly impressive piece of kit. A few little quibbles, but if it was the path I were going down, I'm still tempted, but I'll see after I finish the album, and if I feel like, yep, that's given me something better. And once I finish the album, I'll come out, and then I'll write something in Reason and see if I miss Falcon. If I really miss Falcon, especially $349 worth of missing, then I'll put Falcon on board. If not, it's going to be probably very, very positively remembered time that will be like, yeah, maybe Falcon will go on board sometime later. But the thing is, if I didn't have Reason, I would get Falcon. It's incredibly good, bar those little quibbles, but as long as they're still working on it, and versions do come out, they don't come out very often, but they do come out, and they do seem to move forward with what they're doing. Obviously, a fair amount of it is driven by the soundware business, because there's just faster, easier money in soundware than there is in developing the world's best synthesizer. But in terms of the world's best synthesizer, they are, if not the very best, one of a couple of very best, hands down, full stop, outside of people's personal preferences. Maybe technically Hallion is a little better. I can see a couple of ways we could say, oh, but Hallion beats you here. But unless version 7 has fixed its usability demon, then having more ability is a bit useless if people can't get to it. Contact is definitely, knowing what Hallion's got, knowing what Falcon is like to use, Contact is definitely, well, it's going the way of the saber-toothed tiger, and would have if they didn't have such a strong presence in the soundware market. So all I can say to NI is you might want to be looking at your game, because increasingly people will walk away from that serious end and say, well, Hallion's kicking goals, even if it's a bit of a pig, and Falcon is definitely kicking goals. Even if it's not quite as capable as Hallion, it's more usable. Or, of course, because Reason is growing and becoming more and more aware, I think more and more sound designers are going, why don't we just get the Reason rack and put it in whatever DAW we like? Obviously, having to pay for the whole DAW is a factor, but at the same time, if we looked at just Europa alone, just picking the one synth Europa alone, compared to getting all of that kind of functionality in Falcon. Yes, Falcon can do everything that Europa does and more, but it takes more effort than it does with Europa. And we're here to get the job done, not to pontificate. And there are lots of people in groups and forums who pontificate, but they don't have much work to show for all their pontification. I just want to get the job done. And Falcon is one of the top, let's say, 3 in the game for its synthability. It's a very exciting piece of kit that's got an awful lot to offer to the person who's there for the right reason. Okay, Benedict again for Higher Hertz. Don't forget there's higherhertz.com, different stream of information and what have you over there. I will leave you with the whole piece just to put everything that you've heard into context.